Hello class, here we're going to walk through the Aviation API. We're going to look at three different things. First, we're going to test out the API and its endpoints, just to give you a sense of what we're doing and the libraries that we need in order to access the Aviation API and its endpoints, and give you some examples about dealing with the data, converting it from the raw API response into JSON or the Python dictionary class. Then we're actually going to do some exploratory analysis here where we want to try and find the average weather conditions for a given region, where we define that region based on the airports that are in that region. So if you wanted to understand or extract weather information for a particular area of the United States, you might look for airports that are in that region, maybe just a single airport and get some values or get the average conditions at that airport, or look across the region. And then we'll talk about or examine some code for counting the most common models of airplane that are used across a given region or across a set of airports. If you wanted to understand, well, what are the most popular kinds of planes or plane models, either plane manufacturer or models that are flown by a given airline, this might be a good starting point where you could see, well, what kind of airplanes fly out of the Atlanta area, it's a Delta hub, so you might expect whatever the kinds of planes that Delta runs. But in the New York area, you get a different kind of response since there are three different major airports here. You might see different kinds of airplanes that are popular. And it gives you some insight as well into both private and commercial airlines or planes used by private and commercial airlines. First, we'll talk about testing the API and its endpoints. Tanishka is going to walk you through this example.
For this specific example, we are using three different libraries called time, requests, and NumPy. You can just look up any of these libraries in Google and just look for instance, look for requests API documentation, and you will be able to look at all the associated methods. So requests is the one library which we are using as an API to extract all the HTML information from the server or all the information within the specific server. Here, what we're trying to do is first, we need the API prefix or the URL that has been provided within the documentation. So we will be looking at the Aviation API documentation. So this is what the documentation is going to look like. So within the first example, we are trying to extract information from two airports. So let's look at the airports. Here we have the link to extract information from the servers. And along with that, they have also provided us with parameter called APT. Using this one parameter, we will be able to extract information for a single specific airport, or we can even add multiple airports to it using a comma. Now, looking at the piece of code here, we can see that we have the request.get object here called resp. We have the prefix airports similar to this line. And then after that, we are adding the parameter for two specific airports called the Newark Liberty and the Adirondack Medical Center. Let's run this code. Okay, it's running. Now in this code block, we are trying to find the status code of the request object that we created. So let's run this. It's giving us status code 200, which means that the request was successful. Here we can see if we get 200, then the request was successful. 404 would mean that the request was not successful. In this line, we are looking at the content type or the data type of the object that we created, and we can see that it's a JSON object. Now we look at the content of the object, and we can see that it still doesn't look that presentable or understandable. So we will be creating a JSON object using this. And here we have created the RESP object, which is an object of the JSON type. Once we run this line, we can look at the entire JSON file. Here, an impressive thing about JSON files is that it has specific key value pair. For example, this is a specific key and this is the value associated with it. So later on, when we iterate through the object, we can literally extract specific values using the keys. Now let's go down. So that piece of code, that entire code up till now, was for testing out how to extract information using an API call. Now, what if we want to extract information for several different airports? In this code block, what we have done is created a list of all the airports for which we need to extract the information. And we'll again create a request.get object. But this time, instead of using just 2 airports for the parameters, we'll be joining an entire list. This entire list that we manually created, we'll be joining it to the parameter. And we're again checking if the request status code was 200. That means if the request was successful, and if the data type was JSON. So let me run all of this code. Here, request.get object, assert statements. Then we have converted it to a JSON object. Now here, we're trying to parse through the JSON object called resp object, and we are iterating using 2 variables. So for every kth value would have an airport code, and within the airport code would have different keys. So we have the airport information, and within which the keys are facility name, type, use, city, and state. So we can literally access that information for all of these airports using this loop.
Now we'll talk about finding the average weather conditions in a given region. The way that this will work is we'll take a set of airports or airport codes, extract their weather information using the Aviation API, and just take the mean of them. We'll convert them from Celsius, which is what Aviation API provides, into Fahrenheit, just as a show of a quick kind of transformation that you might provide or that you might perform.
Functionality that the Aviation API documentation provides us is access to all the weather information for the airports. So let's look at the weather information. Here they have provided us the API link to the server. Then we again have one parameter that is used for extracting information for different airports. So in this code, what we are trying to do is create a list of all the airports for which we need the information. And we are again using the resp object that we created earlier, and we are extracting the first entry of each and every airport code. Here we have an if statement, which is checking if the type is not airport. Then continue. So, and then we're appending all of these airport codes to a list called target airport list. Let's run this. And these are all the airport codes that we have received. Here, what we're trying to do is create a list called temperature list. And we are again running a for loop within the target airport list. And we are first printing out the airport code. Now we are creating a request.get object, which has the initial prefix along with the stuff that has been provided us in the documentation. And for the parameters, we're using all the airport codes that were available to us from within the airport API, the Aviation API server. Here we're again checking if the request was successful. If it was not, then we'd be saying no weather information was available for the airport. And we're checking if the data, and in this line, we're checking if the data type was JSON. Here we're converting it again to a JSON. Now we are again looping through the different values within the airport weather, and we're checking if the temperature was greater than 0. Then we're appending all the temperatures according to different airports into a list called into the list that we created earlier. Let's run this. The last piece of line that we have added here is from the time library, and this is used to create a delay in each and every request so that the server doesn't get overloaded with API requests. Here we are creating another object called temperature in Fahrenheit, where we're converting all the temperatures extracted in Celsius into Fahrenheit. And using the list that we created with just calculating the mean temperature. Most common aircraft type.
Now we'll go through counting the most common models of airplane. Again, given a set of airports, we'll use the Aviation API endpoints to look at flights from those airports and then extract what kinds of planes are flying those routes.
And first we're creating a list of aircraft types. Then we are looping through the target airport list. And initially we're printing the airport code. Now we are creating a request.get object. And this time we're using the same prefix, but with different values within it, which have been provided in the Aviation API documentation within VATSIM. And we're using the different airport codes as the parameters. Now we're checking if the status code is not equal to 200. If it's not equal to 200, then we're printing no departures arrival information for the airport along with the airport code. And we're checking if the data type that we're getting out of this is actually a JSON file. Now we're converting the JSON data type information that we have extracted into a JSON object. Here we're creating a counter variable called flight count and assigning it the initial value 0. Here we are creating a for loop and iterating over all the keys in the JSON object. Within this for loop, we're checking for all the departures, and we are adding each and every aircraft into aircraft type, and then we are adding 1 if the aircraft type matches. And each time we carry this out, we are adding 1 to the flight count, and it's the exact same thing with the arrivals. Now we're printing the flight associated with each airport and the number of flights that are associated with the airport. And we're again using the sleep functionality to put a break for 1 second before each request is made. So I've already ran this function, and this is the aircraft type for which the numbers have been added on the basis of how many times that aircraft has been used.
There you go. That's the walkthrough for testing the API and its endpoints, and a couple of very simplistic exploratory analyses where we look at averaging weather conditions over a given region or set of airports and counting common models of airplane used across a number of different airports as well. Let's thank Tanishq for running us through that code. If you have any questions, you can post on the discussion forum or reach out.